Guards at City Hall humiliated a black woman thinking she was unimportant until she stood at the podium and said, "I'm the new mayor." The security guard didn't even look her in the eye before telling her to wait outside like the others. The others, she noticed, were all black. Marissa Jennings had grown used to discomfort. It came wrapped in different packaging. Microaggressions at board meetings, awkward silences in interviews, the lingering glances when she entered a room. But nothing quite stung like being told, in front of a growing crowd, that she wasn't welcome in the very building she was about to lead. She clutched her briefcase tightly, pressing it to her chest as if it could protect her from the humiliation swelling around her. The man in uniform, one of 3 stationed at the front of City Hall, blocked her path like a concrete wall. He didn't ask for her name. He didn't ask why she was there. He assumed, and that assumption was a knife. "I have an appointment," she said calmly. "You and everyone else," he barked, without so much as glancing at her. "Public hearings start at 9. Visitors use the back entrance." "I'm not a visitor." "Ma'am," he snapped, suddenly impatient. "Please don't make this difficult." People passing by slowed, watching the scene unfold. Some with curiosity, others with the kind of pity Marissa hated more than open scorn. She took a deep breath, choosing not to raise her voice. "I am Marissa Jennings. I am the newly elected mayor of this city." Silence spread like a virus. The guard blinked. Once, twice, then laughed short, sharp, disbelieving. "You're the new what?" "I'm the new mayor," she repeated, her voice steady but razor-sharp. It still didn't register. His eyes darted to her clothes, professional but plain. Her skin, her hair, anything but her credentials. "You got ID or something?" The question was spat, not asked, like she was trying to sneak into a club, not her own office. Marissa handed him her badge. The city seal gleamed faintly under the glassy morning sun. He took it, studied it, blinked again. "Oh," he finally said. But "oh" wasn't enough to erase the sting of being dismissed like she was nobody. "Oh" didn't undo the way the crowd now stared with awkward horror, as if they were witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Another guard stepped forward, clearly realizing the situation. "Ms. Jennings, my apologies. Please come inside. There's been a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. It was always a misunderstanding. When they followed her around in department stores, when cab drivers passed her up, when reporters asked about her background, more than her policies, it was always a misunderstanding. Marissa walked through the heavy glass doors without another word, her heels striking the tile like a metronome. Each step echoed. She wanted them to hear it, every single one. Inside, the lobby was empty, too early for the public but already humming with whispers. An aide scurried forward, white and breathless, muttering apologies. But none of them mattered. What mattered was the podium that awaited her in the press room. Today was her first official address as mayor, and the city would listen whether it was ready or not. The cameras clicked like distant lightning. Marissa stood behind the podium, her palms flat against the wood. The seal of the city glowed gold beneath her fingers. This was hers now, not through charity, not by favor, by vote. "My name," she began, letting her voice reach every far corner of the room, "is Marissa Jennings, and I am your new mayor." Another silence, but not from disbelief this time, from awe, from shame, from recognition. "I arrived here this morning to find I couldn't enter my own building," she continued. "Not because I forgot my key, but because someone looked at me and assumed I didn't belong." A few people shifted in their seats. Cameras zoomed in. The live feed was already circulating. Twitter would burn before lunch. "I want to be very clear," she said, eyes cutting through the crowd like glass. "This is not an isolated incident. This is the air we breathe. This is the pavement we walk on. This is how racism survives quiet, casual, assumed." She paused. Let the words hang heavy. "I am not asking for sympathy. I am demanding accountability." The words landed like a gavel strike. From the back of the room, a reporter raised his hand. Marissa nodded. "Madam Mayor," he said, cautious. "Do you plan to take action regarding this morning?" "I already have," she replied. "I walked through those doors anyway." Before Marissa Jennings ever stood at that podium, she had fought her way through 100 closed doors. Born in Eastwell, a neighborhood that newspapers called troubled and politicians ignored, Marissa had grown up knowing that opportunity didn't come knocking, it came running, and you had to chase it full speed. Her mother, a high school cafeteria worker, used to tell her, "They will try to define you before you open your mouth, so open it louder than they expect." And she did. Debate team captain, scholarship winner, law school graduate, city council member, and now this mayor. But none of that mattered to the guards this morning. To them, she had been a black woman in front of a white building. By noon, the incident had gone viral. Clips of the confrontation spread across social media like fire on dry leaves. Some commenters applauded her restraint. Others wanted heads to roll. There were calls for sensitivity training, investigations, letters to the editor. Marissa, however, wasn't interested in retribution. She was interested in change. At the afternoon briefing, she announced a full audit of the City Hall's hiring and training practices. She established an independent task force to investigate systemic bias across all departments. But she didn't stop there. "This isn't about punishing a guard," she said, facing reporters again. "It's about recognizing a culture, a system, one that too often confuses power with whiteness." It was a line that would be quoted in papers across the country. Marissa Jennings wasn't just leading a city. She was redefining what it looked like to hold power and what it took to earn respect. And respect, she knew now more than ever, wasn't given at the door. It had to be demanded from the podium. Marissa sat alone in her new office for the first time. The room was grand, larger than the two-bedroom apartment she grew up in. High ceilings, mahogany desk, old portraits of white men lining the walls, each one staring down with a mixture of indifference and legacy. She wondered how many of them had ever had to prove their right to walk through that door. She took off her heels and pressed her bare feet into the carpet, grounding herself. Her fingers curled slightly around the edge of the desk. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all, not just the insult at the entrance, not just the scrutiny from the press, but the centuries of exclusion wrapped around this position like ivy on a wall. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said, voice steady again. It was Malik Turner, her chief of staff, one of the few people who had been with her since the campaign's scrappy beginning. He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. "You okay?" he asked, pulling no punches. "No," she answered honestly. "But I will be." He offered a small nod. "There's a line forming outside." Marissa raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For people who want to apologize. Reporters, staffers, even the guards." She sighed. "They're not apologizing to me. They're apologizing to their conscience. Or their reputations." "You're not wrong," Malik said. "But it still matters." She stood, slipping her shoes back on. "Let them wait." They shared a look. A silent agreement that some wounds couldn't be patched over with polite regret. In the days that followed, Marissa didn't run from the incident, she ran straight into the fire. She visited schools where little black girls looked at her like a living monument. She stood before community centers and town halls, opening conversations about systemic racism in local governance. She invited former mayors, many of whom had never been asked questions about Recido speak on their blind spots. Not all were comfortable. One former mayor muttered during an interview, "Why can't we focus on the future instead of digging up the past?" Marissa smiled coolly. "Because we're still living in it." Her approval ratings soared in some neighborhoods and plummeted in others. She was called divisive, angry, too focused on race. But she kept showing up. She knew that silence would be easier and safer, but nothing meaningful had ever come from silence. One afternoon, 2 weeks after the incident, she walked the halls of City Hall unannounced. No cameras, no aides, just her. As she passed the reception desk, A young Latina clerk named Eva hesitated, then stood up. "Mayor Jennings?" she asked nervously. Marissa turned. "Yes." Eva wrung her hands. "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For not leaving. When that happened." Marissa tilted her head, curious. Eva continued, her voice shaking slightly. "They do that to us too. Me and the janitorial staff. The guards check our IDs like we don't work here. Like we're always out of place." Marissa's throat tightened. "Thank you for telling me." Eva smiled, then sat down again, head slightly higher than before. It wasn't just about that morning anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been told, subtly or overtly, "You don't belong here." 3 weeks later, Marissa stood before the city council, introducing her first major policy package, the Equal Access and Inclusion Act. It would mandate racial bias training for all city employees, overhaul hiring practices, create whistleblower protections for discrimination, and fund community outreach initiatives led by marginalized groups. The room was packed. Predictably, the opposition was fierce. Councilman Lawrence Bolton, a tenured politician from the wealthier West Side, leaned into his mic with theatrical concern. "Madam Mayor, while I applaud the spirit of inclusivity, isn't this a little aggressive?" Marissa didn't blink. "Aggression is calling for reform after centuries of inequality. What we're doing is correcting course." He pressed on. "But these measures, some might say, they vilify the very workers who keep this city running." Marissa clasped her hands. "I don't want to vilify anyone, Councilman. I want to hold people accountable. And if someone feels targeted by a call for basic respect, perhaps they should examine why." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Bolton reddened. The vote didn't pass that day, but it came close, closer than anyone had expected. And Marissa? She only grew louder. Outside of City Hall, the community was watching. Protests erupted not against her, but in support. Local black artists painted murals of her near schools and community centers. Teenagers began tagging, "She belongs," across abandoned buildings. The city had found a symbol. But symbols weren't enough for Marissa. She wanted structure. She wanted laws. She wanted a foundation that couldn't be painted over or forgotten when the headlines faded. One night, long after the cameras were gone and the halls of City Hall fell quiet, Marissa stayed behind. She walked through the building slowly, taking it in. The portraits still hung their rows of pale faces, all men, all long gone. She stopped in front of the last empty frame. A brass plate had just been affixed beneath it. "Mayor Marissa Jennings, 2025. She stared at it, not with vanity, but with purpose. She didn't want to be remembered just for being the first. She wanted to be remembered for being the one who refused to act like that was enough. Across the city, conversations were shifting. A white teacher who had once skipped over Black history lessons in her curriculum now invited local activists into her classroom. A retired police officer publicly apologized for his role in profiling. A group of college students organized a walk of welcome at City Hall, escorting every employee inside with celebration and dignity. Change was slow, sometimes invisible, but it was happening. Because one woman had stood at a podium, and instead of being grateful just to be there, she demanded to be seen. Weeks turned into months. The media buzzed less. The viral clips faded. But Marissa's momentum didn't. She kept working, passing ordinances, visiting neighborhoods often ignored, meeting with victims of discrimination. She listened. She led. Then one morning, another incident occurred. A young Muslim man newly hired in the city's IT department was stopped by a security guard and told to wait outside until someone white from HR comes to confirm him. The building froze. This time, the footage didn't just go viral. This time, it was handled differently. The guard was suspended within the hour. A formal apology was issued to the employee, signed by Marissa herself. And when the man was asked by a reporter how he felt, he simply replied, "Grateful that we have a mayor who doesn't just talk about equality. She enforces it." Marissa knew the work would never be finished. Prejudice didn't evaporate with a single election, or even a single term. But she had seen what was possible when you refused to be silent. She had felt what it meant to stand tall even after being told to shrink. And now, every time she stepped into City Hall, past the same front guards, she didn't need to say a word. They stood a little straighter, nodded with respect, because they knew she wasn't just the mayor. She was the mirror, reflecting back every uncomfortable truth the city tried to look away from. Autumn arrived like a quiet reckoning. The air turned sharper. Leaves fell in spirals outside Marissa's office window, each one drifting like a reminder. Change doesn't ask for permission. It simply comes. It had been nearly 6 months since that morning on the steps of City Hall. 6 months since the world tried to reduce her to a silhouette, only for her to redraw the outline, bolder than ever. But even victories age, and resistance, like rust, always found its way back in. At first, it was a leaked email, then a series of internal memos. Senior officials, some old allies expressing concerns about Marissa's priorities. They accused her of alienating traditional voters, of focusing too much on identity, of disrupting what had been a functional system. She read every line carefully. They wanted her to return to the middle, to be palatable, to soften. Marissa placed the pages down, slow and deliberate. Then she smiled, tired but defiant. They didn't understand. She hadn't come to soften. She had come to undo. Behind closed doors, a faction of council members began pushing a resolution to limit executive powers, a thinly veiled attempt to restrict Marissa's influence without removing her. When news of it broke, the city splintered into debate. Supporters flooded the plaza with chants of "let her lead." Opponents called her radical, divisive, a threat to tradition. Marissa stood calm amid the storm, but inside, she wrestled with a choice. Fight publicly and risk the distraction, or do something more permanent. Something the system couldn't walk back. She called a private meeting with Malik. "We need to finish the work," she said. He looked at her with quiet gravity. "What are you planning?" She leaned forward. "Legacy." Marissa fast-tracked a proposal she had been quietly building for months. The Dignity Charter. It was more than policy, it was transformation. The charter proposed sweeping changes. Mandatory equity audits for every city department. Citizen review boards with actual disciplinary power. Reparative funding for historically underfunded Black and Brown communities. A permanent Office of Inclusion reporting directly to the mayor, protected from political shifts. It wasn't a compromise. It was a line in the sand. When she unveiled it before the council, she didn't deliver a speech. She delivered a warning. "You cannot pretend to love this city and fear making it just," she said. "If you're comfortable, you're not listening. If you're resisting, you're part of the problem." The room sat stunned. Then came the vote. Failed. Barely. Again. But this time something cracked. The next morning, Marissa walked into the building early. The same guard from her first day, the one who had dismissed her, stood at his post. He was older now, at least in his eyes, worn from the weight of his mistake. He looked at her. Really looked. "Morning, Madam Mayor," he said quietly. She nodded. "Morning, Mr. Fields." Their eyes met for a beat. Not warm, but real. Progress didn't always come in applause. Sometimes it came in acknowledgement. A week later, a group of students staged a sit-in at the council chamber in protest of the failed vote. The youngest was 12, the oldest, 17. They carried signs that read, "If dignity is controversial, then what is power? We see her. Do you?" She opened the door. "We're holding it open." One by one, they sat on the marble floor, refusing to move until the charter passed. Media swarmed. Critics called it orchestrated. But it wasn't. It was inevitable. Marissa arrived in the chamber quietly, moved through the crowd, and sat among them. No cameras, no aides, just her. A girl in a hoodie leaned over. "We're here because of you." Marissa looked at her, eyes stinging. "No, you're here because you saw what was possible." The photo of them sitting side by side made the front page of every paper the next morning. It wasn't strategy. It was truth. The second vote came 2 weeks later. This time, the pressure was unrelenting. Public opinion had shifted. Silence was no longer politically safe. And the charter passed. Narrowly, but it passed. When the final count was read aloud, Marissa didn't cheer. She closed her eyes and let the room fill with the sound of justice arriving. Then she opened them and got to work. In the months that followed, the city transformed. Departments once riddled with nepotism were rebuilt with transparency. Job applications no longer filtered by culture fit, but by equity. Black and immigrant communities received long overdue funding for clinics, schools, and business grants. But perhaps most importantly, people no longer whispered about bias. They spoke its name, and they named who fought it first. On the one-year anniversary of her inauguration, a public art installation was unveiled in the plaza outside City Hall. It wasn't a statue. It was a mirrored podium. At the base, a plaque read, "To those told they do not belong, this is where you speak." Mayor Marissa Jennings. Children climbed it. Activists spoke from it. Tourists snapped pictures beside it. Marissa stood off to the side, unnoticed. She didn't need to be at the center anymore. She had changed where the center was. That evening, as the city glowed beneath streetlights and hope, Marissa sat alone once more in her office. A letter sat on her desk, unopened, from the governor. An offer for a statewide position, bigger platform, national visibility. But she hesitated, because for all its pain, all its trials, this city was home. And there was still more to do. She picked up the letter, held it, then placed it in a drawer, unopened. Not yet. Outside, the mirrored podium reflected the faces of those who had once felt invisible. And inside, the mayor who had once been told to wait outside smiled, because she had done more than lead. She had changed what leadership looked like. And no uniform, no tradition, no locked door could ever undo that. The end.